Moving was supposed to be my fresh start, a chance to leave behind the shadows of a relationship that had faded, leaving only a chill where warmth used to be. I needed something new, something that made my heart beat a little faster, something that felt alive. When I arrived in this neighborhood, I knew I'd found a place where I could truly begin again. It was charming, almost like something from a storybook. Flowers lined the streets, their colors vibrant and endless, soft pinks, bold reds, and cheerful yellows that seemed to glow even on cloudy days. The air smelled fresh and a little sweet, a mix of blossoms and the faint scent of coffee drifting from nearby cafes. Every corner of this new place felt like an invitation. Small, cozy cafes that nestled along the streets, each one with a personality of its own, from rustic tables by the windows to warm lights that spilled onto the sidewalk at dusk. A quaint little market bustled nearby, filled with fresh produce, homemade jams, and friendly faces that greeted each other with a familiarity that made me smile. Just a short walk away was a beautiful park, the kind of green space where families played, couples strolled hand in hand, and old friends sat together on benches, lost in conversation. There was something comforting about having everything within reach, just a walk away. Each step I took along the tree-lined paths felt grounding, like I was leaving pieces of my past with every footfall. I hadn't realized how freeing it could be, to stroll from one place to another, watching the world unfold at a slower pace. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe deeply, to feel at peace with where I was. There was a lightness in the air here, a gentle rhythm that I was starting to fall in love with. Life had begun to settle into a comfortable rhythm. My days had a quiet simplicity that helped to fill the spaces left by everyone I'd moved away from, and my new neighborhood had a way of making me feel at home. Yet, there was a strange emptiness, a sense of longing that crept in when I least expected it, a lingering ache for the familiar faces and voices I'd left behind. Evenings, especially, would bring this feeling to the surface, often washing over me in ways I couldn't always explain. Then, on one of those evenings, misty and thick with drizzle, my life took an unexpected turn. I'd gone to the mall nearby to pick up a few things, simple, organic ingredients for a new recipe I'd been meaning to try. The air inside the mall felt warm, a welcome contrast to the damp chill outside. The overhead lights cast a soft glow over the rows of fresh produce, and the faint hum of people shopping gave the space a cozy, bustling energy. I wandered over to the organic section, scanning the shelves for what I needed, when I noticed him. There was something immediately striking about him. His hair, a mix of silver and peppery gray, framed his face with a kind of rugged elegance, and he had this worn, softened look, like someone who'd lived fully, who'd seen his share of life's ups and downs. He wasn't overly polished or self-conscious, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that felt somehow magnetic. His eyes, a warm hazel touched with flecks of green, crinkled at the corners whenever he smiled. I found myself glancing at him more often than I'd like to admit. As I reached for a bundle of fresh basil, I noticed him reaching for it, too. We both paused, pulling back a little, and shared a quick, amused glance. I gave a polite smile, and he mirrored it, a faint chuckle escaping his lips. A moment later, we both reached for the same bunch of carrots, and then again, a container of cherry tomatoes. Each time we reached for the same item, it felt a bit like an unspoken joke between us, a silent connection in the small coincidences of our choices. After the third time, I couldn't hold back a laugh. "Are you shopping for my list too?" I asked, my voice light, teasing, and half joking. The words slipped out before I'd fully thought about them, but the warmth in his eyes encouraged me. He laughed, a low, rich sound that filled the space between us and softened his features. His laugh was warm and genuine, the kind that made you want to laugh along, even if you weren't quite sure why. It made him look years younger, like a glimpse of the boy he must have once been. The sound felt comforting, and in that moment, the loneliness that had followed me here seemed to melt away. We stood there, both smiling, two strangers in the organic section of a neighborhood mall, sharing a quiet moment in the middle of the evening rush. As I finished my shopping and headed toward the exit, the sound of rain hitting the glass doors grew louder, each drop adding to the steady, rhythmic downpour outside. I hesitated for a moment, hoping the rain might ease up. The cool, misty air slipped in through the small crack of the doorway, carrying with it the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. And there, standing by the doors with a relaxed posture, was the man from the organic section. He seemed to be lost in the sight of the rain, his gaze soft yet focused, as though he were watching something familiar and comforting. He had a calmness about him, as if he was in no rush to be anywhere but right there. Our eyes met again, and a small, knowing smile crept onto his face. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, like we were both sharing some unspoken moment. Without missing a beat, we started talking, picking up the thread of our earlier conversation as if it had never paused. We introduced ourselves, exchanging names with a handshake that lingered just a second longer than usual, and from that point, our words seemed to flow as naturally as the rain outside. He told me he was a retired professor, his voice rich and steady, like someone who'd spent a lifetime speaking thoughtfully and listening well. His words painted vivid scenes of the places he had traveled, the students he had mentored, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Each story felt like a new glimpse into a life well lived, and I found myself enchanted, hanging on to every word. We stood there, just a few feet from the glass doors, the rain soft drumming around us, our laughter filling the waiting area. He shared little pieces of his past, tales from his teaching days, the students who'd surprised him, and the places he loved most. I listened, mesmerized, feeling like I was being let in on secrets from another world. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly present, as if this unexpected meeting was exactly where I was meant to be. When he mentioned that he lived a good distance away, something inside me took over. I surprised myself by saying the words before fully realizing them. I'm just a few blocks from here, and you're welcome to wait out the rain. The invitation left my lips naturally, as though it was something I'd thought about. My pulse quickened, and I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. For a brief second, I wondered if he'd accept or if he'd find an excuse to politely decline. But his face softened, and he gave me a warm, genuine smile that seemed to say he understood my impulsive offer perfectly. The smile lingered, and my heart did a little flip in response. It was the kind of smile that made me feel both safe and slightly nervous at the same time, like I'd stepped into unknown but thrilling territory. His eyes held a quiet confidence that matched his weathered face, and when he nodded, accepting my invitation, I felt a thrill of anticipation rush through me. The rain fell steadily outside, tapping against the windows and creating a cozy cocoon around us as we walked together toward my apartment. The streets were damp and misty, with the occasional street lamp casting a soft glow through the rain, lighting up the drops like tiny stars. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling his presence close by, each step bringing us closer to the warmth of my home and to whatever this unexpected evening might hold. Once we got to my place, we were both a little soaked, our clothes clinging to us from the rain that had caught us off guard. I could feel my damp hair sticking to my face, and I laughed as I brushed it back, noticing he looked just as wet. He stood there, looking a bit sheepish, his hair glistening under the soft lights of my apartment, droplets of rain still clinging to his jacket. I handed him a fluffy, warm towel, and he accepted it with a grateful smile, rubbing it over his face and hair as if savoring its softness. Here, I said, offering him some dry clothes, a pair of my baggy, faded trainers and an oversized hoodie. They were comically big on him, and I couldn't help but giggle when he slipped them on. The sleeves of the hoodie covered his hands, and the trainers hung loosely around his ankles. Yet, despite how out of place he looked, there was something endearing about it, and I found myself smiling more than I had in days. He looked back at me, a playful twinkle in his eyes, and shrugged as if to say, "Well, it'll do." With a mug of coffee in each hand, I led him to the couch, and we sank into its warmth. The mugs felt comforting in my hands, their heat seeping into my fingers, thawing the cold from the rain. I watched as he wrapped both hands around his mug, lifting it to his face to inhale the rich, earthy aroma. The steam rose, softening his features, and for a moment he looked almost younger, relaxed in the simple comfort of a warm drink. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, tapping against the window and filling the silence with a gentle, soothing sound. The world beyond my apartment felt distant, softened by the rain, as if it were just the two of us here, cocooned away from everything else. The dim light in the room cast a warm, golden glow over us, making the whole scene feel cozy and intimate. We sipped our coffee, the warmth filling our bodies, and gradually, we leaned back into the couch, feeling the comfort of each other's presence. His voice softened as he shared stories of his past, his words blending with the sound of the rain. I felt myself sinking into the moment, letting go of everything else, completely wrapped up in the gentle warmth of his company. Our conversation grew deeper, and I could feel the energy between us change. His compliments were not the casual kind. They felt personal, each word lingering in the air like a gentle touch. His gaze held steady, warm and thoughtful, making me feel noticed in a way I hadn't felt in ages. It was as if he could see right into the parts of me I usually kept hidden, and the soft glow of that recognition warmed me from the inside out. Sitting there, with the rain softly pattering against the window, a quiet warmth rose between us, unexpected, gentle, and yet thrilling. I found myself leaning toward him, almost without realizing it, like there was an invisible thread drawing us closer. He leaned in too, our faces just inches apart, sharing the same breath. The light from the lamp beside us cast a soft glow over his face, highlighting the crinkles around his eyes and the streaks of gray in his hair. Then he spoke, his voice soft, almost as if he were telling me a secret. "I've always found younger women captivating," he said, his eyes twinkling with a playful glint. But there was something deeper there, a look that made my heart skip a beat. His hand moved slowly, gently resting on my lap, his touch warm and steady. A shiver ran through me, a soft thrill spreading from where his hand lay, melting away any remaining uncertainty. Outside, the rain had started to ease, the heavy drops turning into a gentle drizzle. But I couldn't bear the thought of him leaving, not yet. His presence filled the room, wrapping around me like a cozy blanket on a cold night. I met his eyes, a hint of vulnerability in my voice as I asked, "Would you stay tonight?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face, as if he were looking for the answer to an unspoken question. Then he nodded, a soft, reassuring nod that seemed to settle any last bit of nervousness I had. His expression was tender, understanding, and in that moment, I felt that words were no longer needed. I reached for him, my fingers lightly tracing along his jaw, feeling the roughness of his skin against my own. We moved toward each other, our faces so close that I could feel his breath on my cheek, warm and calming. His eyes softened, and I let myself sink into the moment, the world outside fading as we let the closeness speak in ways that words never could. We started kissing, his lips soft but firm, moving against mine in a way that was both careful and full of an unspoken hunger. His hands explored me slowly, yet there was a strength in his touch that surprised me, a steady, confident pressure that made my skin tingle. His fingers traced along my shoulders, down my back, leaving a warmth in their wake that seemed to seep into me, filling me with a longing I hadn't felt in so long. Each touch was intentional, like he wanted to mimize every part of me. It wasn't rushed. He took his time, and that only made me want him more. I could sense his age in the way he held me, not in a way that felt old, but in a way that spoke of experience and patience. His arms wrapped around me firmly, grounding me, and his hand rested on the small of my back, pulling me closer, pressing me against him as though he needed to feel every inch. There was a gentleness, too, as if he knew just how to make each moment count. He didn't rush, he savored, and it made me feel cherished in a way I hadn't expected. The room around us faded into a blur, the faint glow from the street light casting a soft, golden hue that flickered through the window, illuminating the quiet intensity between us. Our breaths mingled, shallow and quick, filling the air as we became completely lost in each other. His warmth seeped through his shirt and into my skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest grounding me, making me feel safe even as my heart raced with excitement. His body pressed against mine was solid and warm, a comforting weight that I leaned into. He held me in an embrace that felt secure, yet electric, like I was somehow both protected and vulnerable in his arms. His chest was broad beneath my fingertips, and as I traced small circles, I could feel his heartbeat strong and steady, matching my own quickening pulse. I had only just met him, yet here he was, holding me like I was something precious, his every touch awakening a new sensation. The unexpected closeness, the ease with which we fit together, sent waves of warmth through my entire body. It was as if something I hadn't realized I was missing had been found, something that made me feel completely, breathtakingly alive. When he finally reached his peak, he held me tighter, both of us catching our breath as we lay tangled on the sofa. My head rested on his chest, his heartbeat steady and reassuring. His arms were like a big, comforting cocoon, and I couldn't help but smile at the strange turn the evening had taken. With the first hints of dawn peeking through the window, I drifted off, nestled against him. There was something grounding about him, and as we lay there in silence, I felt as though I'd found a moment of peace, of joy, in the midst of all my searching.